The Lawrence family home was small but cozy. A single-story house with a crooked porch and carved shutters, it stood at the edge of the village, surrounded by an apple orchard. The air always smelled of fresh baking, autumn leaves, and something homey, ineffably warm. Victor Lawrence was a strict, reserved man. Tall, with piercing grey eyes and short, cropped hair, he rarely showed emotion, but his voice brooked no contradiction. Natalie, in contrast, seemed gentler. A small woman with warm brown eyes and a thoughtful expression. She kept the house orderly and the garden in bloom. And then there was Olivia, their only daughter. Olivia had grown up a quiet child. Unlike the noisy village kids, she would spend hours in the garden with a book or staring at the sky, while her father worked in the shed. She did well at school, but had few friends. Only the neighbor girl, Alice, often came over, and they would lock themselves in Olivia's room, talking about their own secret world. And then Olivia disappeared. It happened in autumn. It was already cold. The trees had shed their leaves, and the grey sky hung over the village like a heavy veil. In the evening, when Natalie called her daughter for dinner, the house was silent. "Olivia," she called louder, stepping onto the porch. The yard was empty. The shed's light was off. The wind rustled the last leaves in the apple trees. Natalie frowned and went back inside. "Victor, have you seen Olivia?" Her husband put down his newspaper and slowly looked at her. "She's probably in her room." "I called. She's not answering." Victor got up, walked into the corridor, and gently knocked on his daughter's door. Silence. He pushed the door. The bed was untouched. The books stacked neatly on the table. The jacket hung on a chair. Everything as it had been that morning. Olivia was gone. They searched the house first, then the yard. Natalie ran outside, calling for her daughter, checked the orchard, and peered into the old well behind the house. Victor went to the neighbors. No one had seen Olivia. After an hour, Natalie was already crying, and Victor, clenching his teeth, called the police. Search teams combed the surroundings all night. Officers inspected every bush. Lamps illuminated the dark forest beyond the house. Volunteers shouted her name, but only the wind answered. Olivia had vanished without a trace. Days later, the search was called off. Her parents mourned. Natalie hardly left the house, staring out the window into the autumn forest. Victor spoke little, but each evening he went to the shed and sat there in darkness for long hours. The villagers whispered different things. Some thought she had run away. Others believed she had been kidnapped. But time passed, and Olivia began to fade from memory. Only her parents didn't forget. They remembered. Every night, every rustle outside, every cold gust of wind. 15 years had passed, and one night the phone rang. The phone rang deep in the night, cutting through the silence of the house with a piercing, unpleasant sound. Natalie shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Victor, lying beside her, slowly opened his eyes. "Answer it," he rasped. Natalie's hands trembled as she reached for the old phone on the nightstand. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Mom?" The air caught in her lungs. The voice was soft, barely audible through the static. Feminine, familiar. "Mom, can you hear me?" Natalie parted her lips but could not utter a sound. Her heart pounded wildly. "Who is this?" Victor sat up on the bed, breathing heavily. "It's me, Mom." The voice quivered. "It's Olivia." Natalie jumped to her feet, clutching the phone with both hands. must be a mistake, she exhaled, staring into the darkness. No, Mom, it's not a mistake. I know how you've lived all these years. How every day you pretended I just disappeared. Silence on the other end. Only a faint, uneven breath. Where are you? Victor asked, his own voice unrecognizable. Where you left me. An echoing pause. Stop it, Natalie's voice cracked. This is a bad joke. A joke? Something like laughter entered Olivia's voice, just like my pregnancy was a joke, or that I wanted to run away. Natalie gasped. Sticky fear spread through her chest. Olivia. You knew I was seeing Anton, the voice continued. You knew I was pregnant. Remember, Mom, how you cried in the kitchen while Dad just stayed silent. Victor clenched his fists. Enough, he said sharply. You hit me, Dad. The voice became a whisper. You said I shamed the family. That I had no place in this house. You're lying, Natalie shouted, her voice cracking. And then I said I would leave. Go to the city. Tell everything silence on the line. You couldn't leave, Victor said quietly. Yes, you didn't let me. A dull thump echoed in her chest. Natalie closed her eyes, trying not to remember, but the memory came alive. A cold autumn morning, a crying daughter, bloodied floor. You played your part too well, Mom. Olivia's voice was strangely calm. How you cried in front of the police. How Dad ran through the village, shouting my name. How you held my photo, giving interviews. Natalie's throat tightened. Olivia. Her voice was barely audible. On the other end, a quiet, dead laugh echoed again. Look out the window. Natalie held her breath. Dark night, shadowed garden, and a figure among the apple trees. A moment, and the phone slipped from Natalie's hands, thudding against the wooden floor. Her temples throbbed, cold fear curling around her spine like sticky fingers. This can't be, she whispered, stepping back. But Victor was already rushing to the window. He yanked the curtains aside. Outside, night. Black, starless sky, wind-torn apple tree branches, and the figure, clear, unmoving, as if rooted to the ground. My God! Natalie's lips trembled. Victor leapt up, grabbing the rifle from the shelf. Someone is playing with us. His voice shook with anger, but a primal terror raced in his eyes. I'll shoot. No. Natalie grabbed his arm. It's her. Nonsense. She's dead. She remembered every second of that night. Olivia stood at the doorway, backpack straps clenched in her hands. You won't stop me, her voice trembled, but her eyes held determination. I won't let you hurt me again. Victor stayed silent. His gaze held no anger, only something cold, alien. Natalie thought, can a father really look at his daughter like that? You're ruining your life, he finally said, stepping closer. Olivia stepped back. You ruined mine. Like the click of a trigger, a strike. Olivia collapsed, screaming. Blood dropped onto the wooden floor. Victor, no. Natalie stepped forward, but he shoved her aside. Olivia breathed heavily, propped on her elbows. I'll tell everything, she whispered. Let them know. Let them know what you... She didn't finish. The second strike was precise, strong. Silence. Natalie sat on the floor for a long time, covering her ears to block the sound of Victor dragging her body to the exit. Dad! Olivia's voice came again through the phone. Victor slowly turned, frozen with the rifle in his hands. You arranged everything so well. The voice was quiet, mocking. So neatly got rid of me. And then hugged Mom, comforted her, told her everything would be fine. Stop it. Natalie covered her face with her hands. But I wasn't okay, Mom. I was scared, cold. Dark Victor stormed to the door. but as soon as he touched the handle, he froze. Footsteps, heavy, slow. No. Natalie stepped back. The floorboards creaked. Step, another. The bedroom door opened slightly. Olivia stood in the doorway, pale, with blue lips, her face in shadows, but her eyes glowed in the dark. "You pretended I was gone," she whispered. "Now it's your turn to disappear." The candle on the table flickered and went out, and then there was only darkness. This happened to me very recently, and it still haunts me. Every time I recall that evening, a chill runs down my spine, and questions pop into my mind that seem to have no answers. I'll tell it all in order. I was walking home from work as usual, around 9 in the evening. The bus dropped me off at my usual stop in our quiet residential area. The houses lined the street, and a paved sidewalk ran between them, brightly lit by street lamps. It was the safest path home, and I always chose it, especially after dark. From the stop to my building was only 1 block, but my father, knowing I returned late, would meet me. We had an agreement. He would step outside with our small Pomeranian, Bublik, who would bark joyfully the moment he spotted me. That evening, everything seemed normal. I strolled slowly, glancing around for the familiar figure of my father with Bublik. The street lamps cast a warm yellow glow, and the area was quiet. No cars, no pedestrians, only the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Passing a small clinic where my father worked, I remembered a recent tragedy that had shaken the neighborhood. Just a couple of weeks ago, a man in his 40s, the husband of one of the clinic's nurses, had fallen from the balcony of the 10th floor. Rumor had it that he had stepped out for a smoke, as usual, but slipped on the icy balcony. He landed on the clinic roof, and the impact was so severe that his eyes reportedly popped from their sockets. People said he thrashed for several minutes before dying. The story had shaken the entire neighborhood, and as I walked past, my thoughts grew dark. What could drive someone to such a fate? Was it truly an accident, or was there something else? Lost in thought, I suddenly noticed a man ahead. He was running along the same sidewalk, but in the opposite direction, about 15 to 20 meters away. At first, I didn't think much of it. He could have come from a side street or a yard, but his movements immediately caught my attention. He was limping badly on his left leg. His right leg moved normally, but the left dragged, making his run awkward, almost painful. Then, every so often, he would switch to a normal walking pace, and the limp disappeared entirely, only to return again when he started running. I slowed down to avoid catching up, planning to wait for my father, but the distance never changed. It was strange. He ran slowly, and I barely shuffled along, yet he seemed frozen in place, maintaining the same distance. I watched him for 2 or 3 minutes, trying to figure out what was wrong. The street was deserted, and his figure stood out starkly against the brightly lit sidewalk. He wore a dark jacket and pants, but I couldn't see his face, only his back and that strange, limping gait. And then he vanished, just vanished. One moment I saw him, the next, nothing. The street was straight, with no corners or bushes to hide behind. The archway leading to a nearby yard was far behind, and I would have noticed if he had ducked in. The streetlights illuminated everything, nowhere to hide. No manholes on the sidewalk, nothing he could have fallen into. I froze, a cold wave crawling down my spine. My heart raced, and a sense of being watched grew in my chest. I looked around, no one. No sound, no movement, just silence and light. Fear washed over me in waves. I quickened my pace, almost running, constantly glancing around. My father still hadn't appeared, which only heightened my anxiety. When I finally reached our building, I burst into the apartment. My mother, surprised to see me alone, asked, "Why are you by yourself? Didn't your father go to meet you?" I told her everything about the strange man, his sudden disappearance, and the eerie feeling of being watched. She frowned but said nothing. A few minutes later, my father returned, irritated and cold. He said he had been waiting on the same sidewalk, pacing back and forth, but hadn't seen me. That was impossible. We always met at the same spot, and passing each other on a straight, well-lit street was simply inconceivable. He had left 5 minutes before I arrived, and I should have seen him. We spent the evening discussing the incident, but couldn't find an explanation. Who was that man? Why did he appear from nowhere and vanish just as suddenly? Why did my father and I miss each other on the same sidewalk? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an ordinary passerby, and I simply didn't notice him turn off. But the street was empty, and the light left no shadows to hide in. Perhaps I was tired after work, and my mind played tricks on me. But the sensation of being watched and the icy fear were too real. Thinking back to that night, I can't shake the memory of the tragic fall at the clinic. Could it be connected? Rumors circulated that the man who fell wasn't just unlucky. Some whispered that he was called by something. Others said strange events had happened in that building before. Tenants hearing footsteps in empty apartments or seeing shadows in windows. I don't believe in ghosts, but what if that runner was something else? Perhaps the trapped soul of that man, caught between worlds, or something that had taken his form. This story remains a mystery to me. I still walk that same sidewalk, but now I always glance over my shoulder, fearful of spotting a limping figure ahead. And whenever my father meets me, I subconsciously quicken my pace, eager to reach him and Bublik. Was it imagination, a ghost, or something I'll never understand? I can't say. But that night left an indelible mark on my memory, and I know one thing for sure. I will never walk that street alone again. This story happened in 1955 in the English countryside. I was about 20 years old. My mother had died when I was a child, and I was raised by my father, William Clinton. My name was Tony Clinton. We lived in Cambridge, in a 2-story house, comfortably enough. Later, when I turned 17, my father passed away. I graduated from Cambridge Medical University at his insistence, since my mother wanted me to pursue medicine. When I turned 20, I was sent to a small village called Grayford. The locals needed help. People often fell ill, and children died from a lack of clean water. There was no way back for me. I was placed in the house of an elderly man who barely spoke. They said he had lost his wife and child, which explained his silence. I didn't pay much attention. There were rumors in the village about a creature that attacked people and dragged them into a dark forest at the edge of the village, only about 300 meters away. People feared the place but could not avoid it, as the river there was the village's only source of water. I was not superstitious. I thought it was just wolves. One morning, after finishing my work, I stumbled upon an old legend in the archives about a creature called Crine, named after Grayford, where it lived. The legend told of a young man named Martin. He had no father, and his mother died giving birth to him. An old woman named Kayla took him in, as she had no children of her own. Martin grew up withdrawn and rarely spoke to anyone. Kayla raised sheep, and Martin had to tend them. One evening, while he was out at the pasture near the forest by the river, the sheep returned without him. Kayla went to check and found one sheep covered in blood, not its own, and then found Martin barely alive. She dragged him home. After that, Martin became even more reclusive. He often ventured into the dark forest and returned carrying strange things. His eyes shone with anger and a thirst for death. No one knew what had happened to him. When Kayla died, Martin disappeared, and Crine appeared in the forest. No one could describe it. Anyone who saw it vanished. They said when the forest was empty, Crine hunted humans. I was fascinated, but I didn't take the story seriously. Life went on. I tended the sick, gave out medicine. Occasionally, people went missing by the river, but I assumed accidents. One day, a villager named Jacob went to fetch water and fell into a pit dug for trapping animals. He was badly hurt, and I, as the only doctor, had to go to him despite the rain and foul weather. After giving him first aid and guiding him back to the village, I heard the crackling of branches at the forest edge. A shadow flickered. I followed it into the woods. The forest was dense, branches snagged my clothes, yet my legs seemed to move on their own. Finally, I reached the spot where I expected the creature to be. I crouched in the bushes, and there it was. The creature was covered in grey, shaggy fur. Its jaws could swallow a 10-year-old child in one bite. It stood on its hind legs, leaning its forelegs against a tree. Its long tail brushed the ground. I knew it was Crine. Foam dripped from its mouth. It seemed to be catching its breath. I was frozen in shock, unable to move. The creature advanced slowly, carefully, silently. Only the crackle of branches and its heavy breathing could be heard. I was terrified, yet powerless. Its gaze paralyzed me. My arms and legs refused to obey. I just sat there, staring into its eyes, deep, filled with hatred and darkness. Yet there was something human hidden deep within, though its thirst for flesh and death consumed it. I thought, is this real? What made it this way? The creature approached, and I could not move. Every step was deliberate and slow. I felt as though I was standing on the edge of life and death. Though I knew this was no ordinary animal, fear and dread completely overtook me. My life, the entire village, anyone nearby could fall victim to Crine if caught in its sight. That was the end of my first encounter with Crine. But I knew it was only the beginning. From that day on, every trip to the forest, every journey to fetch water, every evening in the village reminded me that evil, born of a curse, exists, and it is always near.